We are beginning the book of Shemot together, the book of Exodus together. Because we are in the triennial portion, we will be reading the end of the first portion of the book of Shemot, which is called Shemot, right? So, in the Eitz Chaim, the Eitz Chaim edition of the Torah, what page are we on the Red Book?
If you tell us chapter and verse.
Oh, right. So Exodus chapter 4, verse 18.
It's 319 in the green.
In the Women's Torah.
319 in the Women's Torah commentary.
335.
335 in Eitz Chaim. So for those of you in another edition, it's Exodus chapter 4, verse 18. We are...
the very top.
We find ourselves immediately after Moshe has had his encounter with God, the famous theophany, where he comes upon the sneh, the bush that is on fire, but something miraculous is happening. It is on fire, but the actual bush itself is not being consumed by the fire. It's a lovely, amazing scene in Torah, one of my favorites. But we're not studying that today. So it's immediately after that's Moshe's commissioning. So Moshe has been commissioned by God. Remember, Moshe is reluctant. He's the reluctant, prophet. He's the reluctant leader. The only good leader, right, is a reluctant leader. So he is very reluctant to take on this role, both because it seems impossible and because it is not how he understands himself as somebody who is a public speaker and a public leader. He argues with God for a while. God is very patient, and then God gets a little fed up, right, and says, stop arguing with me. Just do what I've asked you to do. Trust me on this one. I'm God. I know what I'm doing, right? Trust me. So finally, Moshe accepts his commission to go back to Egypt, where he is, of course, he is a fugitive from Egypt because he has killed someone. Only Pharaoh has the right to kill someone in Egypt. So Moses is in serious trouble, right? His life is forfeit, essentially. So he is a fugitive from Egypt, and he's being told, go back. So we can understand his reluctance on many, many levels. But he accepts his commission. We are at verse 18, where Moshe must go and get permission from his father-in-law to leave. Right? He works for his father-in-law. He runs the company. And so he needs to go tell the chairman of the board that he's no longer going to be, right, CEO of the family business. All right. So somebody want to begin at 18.
Moses went back to his father-in-law, Jethro, and said to him, let me go back to my kinsfolk in Egypt and see how they are faring. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. Adonai said to Moses in Midian, go back to Egypt, for all the authorities who sought to kill you are dead. So Moses took his wife and sons, mounted them on an ass, and went back to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God with him.
All right, so clearly this is not in order, right? This is not in chronological order. This is where things get a little confusing in Torah. Things move back and forth, unless it's kind of a discussion about eventually he was going to go back to Egypt. Because, right, he's going back to his father-in-law to say, let me go to my family in Egypt and see... My English says how they are faring, but the text actually says ha'odam chayim, to see if they're still alive. So Moshe wants to go back and check in. Why doesn't he tell Yitro what's really going on?
Why does he?
Why doesn't he? He's not going back to see if his family's alive. What's he going back for?
But hasn't he already told he hasn't told Jethro about the bush? Oh, he hasn't. Okay.
Jethro's a Midian priest.
Jethro's a Midian priest, so...
He might not understand.
He might not get that some invisible force called Yud Hey Vav Hey says, you need to go back there and, Pam?
Free the slaves.
Free the slaves. So why might he be a little hesitant to tell Yitro he's going to go free the slaves?
Might not like it.
Maybe Yitro has slaves. Maybe he's thinking, wait a minute, what are you saying about my system? What else?
I could think of a lot of reasons.
Okay. It's a little ridiculous.
Assumedly, Yitro worshipped another god. Maybe didn't want to offend him
So I'm leaving your deity
above his father-in-law's god.
and I'm listening to somebody else now.
Yeah.
He's also breaking up the family.
He's breaking up the family. He's going to take Tzipporah. If you were Yitro and Moshe told you the truth about where you were going, do you think you'd let Tzipporah go?
With your grandchildren?
With your grandchildren?
No way.
No. So for lots of reasons, Moshe's a little elusive about what he's really going to do. And then we get this statement that looks like it should have gone somewhere else, right? So go back to Egypt, God says to Moshe, for all the people who wanted to kill you are dead. Moshe took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and went back to Egypt. Moshe taking the rod of God with him. So Moshe, Tzipporah, and both boys go to Egypt, we're told here. Later, when the Israelites are brought out of Egypt, we're told that Yitro brings Tzipporah and the two boys to Moshe.
Confusing.
It's confusing. It's confusing because we're not told when she's sent home. We are told she was sent back. We're not told when that happened or why. We do not have that story. Some people want to connect what we're about to read with why she is eventually sent back. We don't know. So, but it seems they did go, and then at some point they are sent home. All right, so the rod of God, we get this reference, right? We're not sure exactly. There's lots of references to this. And some people in our tradition want to make the same rod be the one that Aharon uses, that Moshe uses, and that is used of God in describing God sometimes, right, as God having a rod. In ancient Near Eastern tradition, the gods had a rod, right? Think of Zeus. The lightning bolt, so that idea of a rod being something powerful, like kings have scepters, queens have scepters, right? It is a symbol of absolute authority. We know that Moshe is going to work some miracles using this rod, right? Using this staff. Right. So somebody read, please, at verse 21.
And the Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the marvels that I have put within your power. I, however, will stiffen his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son. I have said to you, let my son go that he may worship me. Yet you refuse to let him go. Now I will slay your firstborn son.
Okay, so we get the first reference to this idea of Pharaoh with this business about the heart. There's going to be several words used about this whole heart business. In this case, it is chazek. So I will strengthen Pharaoh's heart. Suggesting, in our tradition, the rabbis really understand this to be that Pharaoh's heart was already set in the direction not to let them go. Right? It was already set that he was a man who didn't care about the suffering of other people. He had no compassion. Like he was not going to be interested in justice or equity or anything like that. And so his heart is going to get strengthened in that direction. It's not something new. The rabbis are very clear that what God does is simply intensify what Pharaoh is already experiencing. I'm not saying I agree or disagree. Our tradition really does not want to go to a place where Pharaoh was set up as a complete innocent. Do you know what I mean? And God comes in and manipulates Pharaoh and then squishes it. But definitely there is an element of divine influence. Half the time in Torah, it seems to reference that this is Pharaoh's, kind of way of being. like an essential part of who he is. Half of the references to this business are attributed to God. So it seems that Pharaoh's already somebody who is recalcitrant, and God intensifies that for God's own purposes, which are what?
Free the slaves.
God could free the slaves without stiffening Pharaoh's heart. It would happen sooner if Pharaoh's heart were not stiffened.
I think to
God
show
wanted-
who's the boss.
This is a showdown. This is more than freeing the slaves. This is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh wanting to make it clear,
Yeah, his supremacy.
I am supreme. Right? Exactly right.
Wasn't the Pharaoh was semi-divine?
Forget semi, right?
It was divine, yeah.
Divine was going to be a god of Egypt. Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is God taking on God
Our
in
God killing
Egypt,
their God?
and all, therefore, of the other gods of Egypt. Because if Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is this clearly in charge, then and in order to bring these plagues, Pharaoh has to not give in. So that God has God's own agenda going on here. All right, but we're going to go to this business. God says, Israel is my firstborn son. So all children of the world are mine. All peoples of the world are mine. However, there is a special relationship between me and Yisrael. And so I want you to say to Pharaoh, let my son go, that my son might, what's the Hebrew word here? That my son might do what? Ya'avdeni. Serve me. That my son may serve me. You refuse to let him go. Now I will slay your firstborn son. Hear all of these references to son. Israel is God's son. God challenges Pharaoh, let my child, my son, go. Pharaoh says no. So God says, well, then you now make your son forfeit. His life is forfeit now. That is exactly, remember that language as we move right into this next scene. Okay? Hold those references with you as we go into this next scene. Somebody read at 24.
At a night encampment on the way, Hashem encountered him and sought to kill him. So Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched his legs with it, saying, "You are truly a bridegroom of blood to me." And when God let him alone, she added, "A bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision."
Okay. So, between the commissioning of Moshe and his next official act as this newly commissioned prophet, leader, spokesperson for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, leader of the people, there is this bizarre incident, right? It is incredibly terse even for Torah. Even for Torah, this is pretty terse. Which suggests what? We've been studying together for a while now. If it's this terse, what might it suggest? Something's missing. We've lost the rest of this story. We've lost the rest of this tradition. One reason might be why. Why isn't it here? It was so well known. All you have to say is that business with Zipporah on the way with the flint knife. Everyone knew this story. Right? So,
Rabbi, isn't there some confusion about whether it's Moses or the son that's being circumcised?
thank you, Ruvain. Thank you, Ruvain, who brings us, right, to our looking at the text a little more closely. Because as terse as it is, it's highly confusing. At a night encampment on the way, they are camped on the way going from Midian back to Egypt, right? What does the Hebrew tell us? On the way, Bamalon, a night encampment. Malon, usually, like in modern Hebrew, means hotel, an inn, right? So Malon, probably chosen for its closeness to the Hebrew word for circumcision, which is?
Milah.
Milah. So Malon, Milah, right? We can't miss the alliteration here. Vayivgeshehu Yud-He Vav-He. God pagashes somebody. Okay? So God is pagashing somebody in order to kill him. Okay. So, God pagashes somebody. Let's remember pagash. Interesting that we have God pagashing in order to kill. And then we'll see what happens at the end of the episode. Then we've got God pursuing somebody, right? Coming after meeting somebody, and not in a happy way, to kill him. Who might Yud-He Vav-He be looking to kill? What are our choices? Moses.
Someone pursuing
The baby.
The baby. Which baby?
Well,
Could be Gershon.
The
The
firstborn.
youngest, the youngest.
Could be the youngest. Could be Eliezer. Who else might it be?
stranger.
What stranger?
I don't know.
God's coming after them on the way to kill him.
Somebody else entirely.
Yeah, just
Somebody else entirely.
stranger.
Okay. So,
Why would he kill? Why would he?
aha. So, this story, depending on how we read it, has a very different meaning, right? There's lots of different stuff going on, but it means something different depending on partly what's going on here. Okay. So, why is God seeking to kill somebody? If it's Moses, why might God be coming after Moses given what Zipporah does?
because he hasn't circumcised his son.
Because Moses hasn't circumcised one of his sons. Which one? Presumably,
Why not either one?
Did he do the first?
Is it possible that he did?
we don't know. Here's the challenge. We don't know. So, some scholars want to say the deal with Zipporah and the Midianite tradition was one son would be for her and her tradition, but the second son, it was understood, would be circumcised the way Israelites circumcise their children. Midianites circumcise, by the way. So do Egyptians.
Do we know that Moses is circumcised?
We do
yet?
not know anything.
Right.
We don't know anything.
But do they circumcise differently, or is
How do you circumcise
yeah?
different? I mean, who does it, whether it's a man or a woman?
Good, Linda. It's about when you circumcise. Circumcision was generally understood by anthropologists to be a rite of fertility at 13. Preparing for fertility, right? That's the point, some people say, of circumcision.
Well,
Is to make the male member appear as it does when it's ready to have intercourse. That is the purpose of circumcision.
and it's also
Yes.
symmetric.
What?
And it's also symmetric with menstrual flow, which happens around 12, 13, or whatever.
Correct. So these
Well,
all would
so
have been,
it's
right?
a balance.
Fertility, right? All about starting pubescence,
Right.
right? So it was a rite of passage. It was a bloody, painful, awful, and I don't mean awful like bad,
Yucky.
awesome experience that many cultures have at pubescence, right? That rite of passage. When our kids complain about bar mitzvah, wham, wham, wham. Yeah. You have 7 aliyot to learn. Wham, wham, wham. Yeah. So, other cultures, including possibly Midian, have this as a rite, guess when?
At marriage.
At marriage. Right before marriage. What do we call, so, before we go, okay. So right before marriage. So we've got birth, adolescence, and not long after pubescence would have been marriage, right? So possibly God's coming after Moses because Moses didn't circumcise one of his sons, or
Or himself.
himself. But given that Egyptians and Hebrews circumcised, there's every reason to believe that the baby Moshe might have been circumcised. We don't know, but there's reason to believe he was.
Did the Egyptians circumcise at birth or at later?
I think it's later. So Gershom, if Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is coming after Gershom or Eliezer, why? Why come after Gershom or Eliezer?
Particularly because it wouldn't have been their fault if they weren't
Wouldn't have been their fault.
Unify the family.
Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is coming after the kid to kill the kid because...
To make the parents suffer.
To make the parents... Why make Moshe and Zipporah suffer?
Because they're not following his...
Aha. So to punish Moses. What did we just read? You're going to go to Pharaoh and say, free my son. Pharaoh's going to say no. So what happens because of that?
Kills the son.
Pharaoh's son is forfeit. His life is forfeit. So maybe the firstborn's life is forfeit unless and until something's done ritually to change that. You, Moshe, are about to go challenge Pharaoh, and in that challenge, Pharaoh's going to lose his son. You cannot go back there and even think about beginning this until you have taken care of the business at home with your son. Because his life is forfeit. Let's make it clear. His life is forfeit.
Why did the Israelites start circumcising after birth if the people who were circumcising before them were doing it at puberty or, the 3 other times? Where did the after birth come from?
God said
We're
so.
not told. We don't know.
Well, I mean, God says so. In the Torah.
In the Torah, God
said
says so. Where does it come from? We don't know. So
Maybe it's more humane.
clearly, it's an Israelite innovation on the practice. It is clearly a new understanding of what circumcision is about. Possibly, once you're going to radically change the meaning of a ritual, you need to change something else, like when you do it. That this is no longer a fertility rite. The Israelites were moving away from the pagan idea of fertility rituals and rites and deities and moving instead into an idea of covenant. So if you're going to bring a child into the...
But how do they look different if everyone else is being circumcised just later?
I
thought it was to make them look different.
No, it was never about making them look different. It was about completing creation. It was about making the male member perfect. That's it. And as a sign of the covenant between Israel and God. What other people do is their business.
What do you mean making it perfect?
Because it was understood by the Israelite people that the male member was not perfect uncircumcised. Something had to be done. A perfect penis is one that looks ready for intercourse. And it's not perfected until the orla is removed. Until the foreskin is removed.
Is there anything in the commentary about any parallels between Abraham holding the knife over Isaac and God holding the knife over either Gershom or Eliezer?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Only because we're not told how that looks.
Right.
God is coming after them to kill them. We're not
And
told. But what I'd like to see is Avraham holding the knife over Yitzchak and Zipporah holding the knife over whoever it is she's holding the knife over.
Right.
That's a very interesting parallel.
Aren't they both flint? No?
Abraham's is a ma'achelet.
Oh, okay.
The knife he uses is a ma'achelet. What does ma'achelet sound like? Le'echol, to eat. Why?
The sacrifice.
Because you eat the meat. Also, people would often, in the ancient world, stab meat with their knife and eat it off the knife. Which I like to do as well. So you eat it off the knife. Then, I'm not sure it suggests flint. But
Can we get back to this?
Please, Reuben. Thank you. All right. So possibly this is a parallel, right? You can't go challenging Pharaoh, whose son is going to die, without taking care of the business with your son, Moshe. Right? What is an argument for this?
The other doesn't really make that much sense.
I don't think there is any.
This to me doesn't make much sense.
You mean that it was someone else?
Someone else entirely doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, I'm not saying it can't be, but it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Let's just go back to Abraham circumcised himself, right?
Yes.
And then who circumcised Isaac?
Presumably Abraham.
What?
Abraham. Yeah.
And then who circumcised Jacob?
So father circumcises son, is how it goes. All right. So Yahweh sought to kill. Yudevaveh sought to kill him. We've got a couple of options up here. So Tzipporah, of course, takes a flint knife, of course, and cuts off her son's foreskin. Of course, right? So your family's in danger. You grab a flint knife and cut off your son's foreskin, right? And touched his legs with it. We're clear that one of these two is the one who is circumcised, which meant they were not before, which lends some credence to the idea that it was the son and not Moshe in terms of not being circumcised, right? Because it's the son. But it could be that this is a right to transfer, because if Moshe wasn't circumcised and he's got to get circumcised now, what would that mean for the journey? He would be incapacitated. So possibly Tzipporah. So let's guess that it's Moshe himself who's not circumcised. You can't be my agent and go challenging all this business without you yourself being fully into this people. You can't go for them on their behalf, right? Protesting, like, let the people go. You're all in. You identify completely with this people, or it won't work. So then you got to circumcise yourself. But if she circumcises Moshe, he's now incapacitated. So she circumcises her son and touches the foreskin to whose legs? Moshe's. She circumcises her son. She touches the blood to Moshe's legs in order to say, let it stand for him. A ritual act of transferring the effect of the rite, R-I-T-E, onto Moshe. Support for that reading is found in what she says. Could be found, let me be clear. Because she says, Chatan damim ata li. A chatan of blood are you to me. What is a chatan?
A groom.
Chatan is a groom. So that would make some sense, that he's called chatan. That it's his legs she touches. You are now a bridegroom of blood to me. You are now you weren't circumcised before we got married, as should have happened. Now you are a complete groom to me.
It seems strange that it's Zipporah that does all this, because you said that it was the father. And so why wouldn't Moses be the one to circumcise
What
his
is
son?
Yitro to Moshe in Hebrew? In Hebrew. His father-in-law in Hebrew. What did we just saw it? He went back to Yitro to get permission to leave. This is so exciting. Verse 18, Vayelech Moshe, Vayeshav el Yeter. He returns to Yeter. Chotno. His what? His chatan.
Oh,
His father-in-law.
chatan. That's important.
So, if this, now you are a father-in-law to me. Don't read groom. what does it make Tzipporah? So
daughter-in-law.
why Tzipporah?
Daughter?
Tzipporah has taken over in this action the role of the father of the clan, whose responsibility it was to see that everybody is circumcised. Therefore, she becomes to Moshe his chatan, his father-in-law. She takes on the role of Yitro, doing what needed to be done and saving everybody's life. But she does so taking on the authority of Moshe's chatan, his father-in-law.
But that wouldn't satisfy, theoretically, God and what God's commandment was.
It does.
But I know, but I mean, traditionally, because it's the men who do it, and besides which, she was a
First of
Midianite.
all, there's nothing in Torah that says it has to be a man.
It was just who did it.
And you wouldn't expect a Midianite priest to do it for God. I mean,
So it's a Midianite priestess.
It's not in his
Well, she wasn't a priestess. She was a...
Ha 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 ha
It
ha.
was-
So, in some scholarly thinking, that's exactly what she is.
But she is a
She
priest.
is the daughter of the high priest of Midian. You had better believe she was a priestess. She was a high priestess. How else does somebody know when there's something freaky going on how to pick up a flint knife and circumcise somebody? Like, how does she know? Like most of us, somebody, God forbid something happens to somebody here at this table, we all kind of freeze. Who doesn't freeze? A doctor. A paramedic. They jump up, well, maybe moms and dads, jump up and run and start doing what has to be done. It's instinctive, out of practice, out of doing it as routine over and over and over. Tzipporah was a priestess, and she knew exactly what to do.
And why would circumcision be chosen as one of the signs of the covenant when it was being done by other?
All right, so you know what? I don't want to focus on that. I'm happy to have a conversation about it, but I don't want to go back to circumcision right now. I want to move us into another. So what's the other? So she circumcises her son. She touches the foreskin to Moshe's legs. That suggests that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh was after whom?
Moshe.
Possibly after Moses. If she circumcises her son and she touches the blood to, what's another possibility? To
The child.
their legs. Why? Saying, you are a bridegroom of blood to me.
No, it doesn't.
You were married to the covenant is what it
Huh?
means to me. That now you're married to the covenant.
But the circumcision should have done that.
Well, and it was symbolic to just throw that down, and now you're.
Throw that down.
The blood will, the marking of the blood will protect the firstborn in Egypt, so this protects the marking of the blood. It's protection.
Very nice.
Beautiful.
Very nice. Taking that blood and touching it to the legs of her son is protective. Not about the circumcision, about the destroyer. The destroyer that's been unleashed. Once the destroyer is unleashed, you must mark with blood to protect. Look.
Beautiful.
Either way, actually, it works, whether it's her son or Moshe. Right? Just as they will put the touch, it's the same word, by the way, in Hebrew. They will apply the blood to the lintel. So it is that Tzipporah applies the blood to either Moshe or her son. In either case, let's be clear that Tzipporah was right. Right? However unclear it is, even though we don't know what happened, Tzipporah was right. Whoever she chose, however she did it, she knew what to do. Interesting, given that it's Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh who's coming after somebody.
And it's interesting because this is like the dynamic of an interfaith marriage.
Right?
Where in fact it is the
She
mother and the
performs some,
convert who cares more about the kids getting bar mitzvahs than the father who's Jewish.
Very, very interesting. So the other option, instead of, if we go with this someone else, there is a tradition that says it is not God's self, God forbid, that would come after somebody. What would be normative for us? An angel. The destroyer. In that case, there is some folk who want to read that she takes the bloody foreskin, and to whose legs does she touch it? The angels. Right? Either to say, your mission is over. By this blood of circumcision, you're canceled. Your job that you were coming to do is canceled. Write the safe word. Or, she says to the angel in touching the blood, you are now a bridegroom of blood to me. I have performed a scary, awful, right, intense thing, and you now report to me. Or at least, I have some kind of power over you now. We're in a special relationship after what I just did. You can't hurt him now. You're mine.
Is there any other place in Torah where a woman steps forward in that way? Or, is the woman...
Don't miss the upcoming class, Real Housewives of the Torah. Thank you for that commercial, Sarah.
To save the day.
Because it just seems so unusual when you think of how women were treated down the ages. But, I'm willing to buy it.
Willing to buy what?
What I'm willing to buy is that this woman, Zipporah, was of such character and strength in herself, even if it was 5,000 years ago or whatever, that she took over. I think it's possible.
It's extremely possible, given that she's the daughter of the high priest.
Yeah.
That it's plausible to me that ancient peoples knew of women who had a great deal of power. They were women who were Vestal virgins, who were oracles, who were prophetesses, who were magicians, right? So women who stepped outside the normative power structure where they were disempowered and became empowered in a different way. Like it's the only way I could imagine myself surviving back then is becoming a Vestal virgin, becoming something where you are removed from a situation which would normally get me killed. My mouth. So she sidesteps the whole. She wasn't part of a system possibly that had her disempowered. Do you know what I mean? And that's how women throughout history, I think, have found.
And especially if the father was the powerful one, like Rashi's daughters.
Right? He has the authority to allow some things to be a little different. And the women, I was just reading an interesting article in preparation for the Real Housewives of the Bible class. An interesting article about women in traditional societies who were accustomed to not being empowered in a certain way. They fared often much better in circumstances of oppression and slavery because they were used to manipulating the system. So all of our matriarchs manipulate the system, all of them. Zipporah is more out front about it, but any of them, Sarah, Rivka, all of them manipulate the system. You know what I mean? They take control. They just do it in the way that traditionally women could access powers, influencing the men, having things happen in secret, manipulating other people. That was their channel to power. And that they fared much better in circumstances of slavery and oppression, which is fascinating. Madame?
Yeah, if I understand it correctly, the Midianite
tradition was the circumcision at marriage. Is that
Possibly.
We don't really know.
We don't really know.
There's just something about the way she says, a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision, and it almost feels to me like, I feel like she's claiming Moses in her tradition.
So how would
somehow God is like, it's kind of like a way of saying God accepts Zipporah because he backs off, even though she wasn't really an Israelite.
So she's taking Moshe fully into Midianite tradition?
I know it sounds really weird, but that's
So-
what it feels like.
So flesh it out. What might that suggest?
It's like a way of saying God accepts Zipporah completely for who she really is as Moses' wife, even with her Midianite tradition.
Right.
And also he accepts the union of the two of them because she uses a Midianite ritual, and God answers it by backing off.
It's very clear, no matter how one reads this, that God accepts Zipporah fully in her role, right? Either as maker of somebody completely within the Israelite tradition, which is interesting, or in her own tradition. It's very clear that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh accepts Zipporah completely. And so there are some who read it the way Bert suggested earlier, that Zipporah is the one who gets it, that Moshe's riding the fence, that he's raised Egyptian, he's been hanging out in Midian for a long time, he's been in the house of the high priest of Midian and possibly his priestess wife, and it's Zipporah who gets it. If you're going to go do this business and you're taking our children into this, you better be you're driving the kid to Hebrew school. And you're going every week. And you better get yourself to Torah study as well. And services once a month, right? You're not doing anything to really make the commitment. And you're dragging us into a serious situation. You need to commit. And it's she who understands that he's been on the fence. And that either, whether it's her son or her husband, circumcision, in terms of entering into a specific relationship with the God of Israel, had to be done in order for them to be safe.
This puts a different light on Moses, because Moses, the great teacher, just was telling God, no, I don't want to do this. He was reluctant for that. It appears as if he doesn't take the lead here. Then when they go to Pharaoh, it really is Aaron, his brother, that takes the lead. And he doesn't come out as a strong leader here. I mean, you would think...
Moses?
Moses. If you would think he was a strong leader, you'd say, well, God, this happened and that. And so Moses stepped forth, and Moses did this, and that's not him at all. He's totally silent. And his wife completely takes over the situation.
Mm-hmm. And if you think about Moshe's origins, right, it was Shifra and Pua, and then it was Yocheved, and then it was the daughter of Pharaoh at the behest of Miriam, right? So Moshe has been passive throughout the entire experience, you might even argue through now, and it's the women in his life who have not only saved his life twice now, 3 times now, but again here, but they get him to the next place that he needs to be in order to be the leader who's going to take the people out. Moshe, I think, very much is a seriously reluctant leader. And in some ways, the older I get, the more I study this material, the more tragic Moshe's life in some ways appears to me. That he's a reluctant leader. His career is riddled with the people rebelling and them criticizing and threatening his life and Aaron's life to stone them to death. And then at the end of it all, he looks over and is going to see the promise but can't go in. I mean, in some ways, Moshe's life is... He would have been happy in Midian. I feel like he's this poor guy. So Jewish.
Going back, even though it's in the first third, not what we're doing now. Going back to the beginning of the Moses story, when he kills the Egyptian in the first place, that leads to everything else. Even it's an Egyptian who kills a Hebrew, but it's not really clear that Moses strikes down the Egyptian out of any true sense of solidarity with the Hebrew. It could have just been his sense of justice, or that seemed completely. What was the point of that? So he takes out the Egyptian, and then when he talks to comes upon the two Hebrews who are arguing with each other or fighting, and he says, "Why are you arguing?" Again, he just may be curious. It's not like we're Hebrews, we're better than this, or that kind of thing. So it's not even clear at that point that he is sort of bought into any kind of
absolutely, it's unclear. I read it that he doesn't know.
Right.
I prefer the story that he doesn't know that he's Hebrew. There's nowhere we're told he knows he's Hebrew. So some scholars want to go to that incident, and they locate the danger to Moshe in that incident, because the taskmaster did not kill the Hebrew.
Right. He was
just beating him.
Right.
The only person who killed anybody was Moshe. That Moshe struck out of anger, even if it's a sense of injustice, he in anger slew somebody. That's murder or manslaughter if it's temporary insanity, right? So, but he has blood on his hands.
And later he struck the rock.
Moshe has a temper issue, which is why I think he would have been so much better in Midian. Right? Like, you leave him alone with the flocks and the whatever. So some want to suggest that's the danger to Moshe. That's what brings this whole thing on, is that he's going back to Egypt, but he still has blood on his hands. And something has to mitigate. Blood has to pay for blood. We know that from Torah. The blood goes into the ground and cries out. Something has to be done. Blood has to answer for blood. And here it is.
Did I understand you to say that Moses may not have known he was a Hebrew?
Correct. We are never told that he's told. He's raised in the palace as the daughter of Pharaoh.
Yeah, but he has family, his brother, his sister.
No, he has a wet nurse.
No, as an adult.
So as an adult, he knows as an adult. We don't know when he's told. We don't know when he realizes that he is Hebrew. We have no idea when that happens.
And he certainly wouldn't have been circumcised at 8 days.
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know. But Reuben, some people want to look. Those of us who like to read this as he didn't know. Why do I like to read it that way? Because it makes it a way more better story for me about someone raised with privilege, choosing a mission to go help those who are oppressed out of a sense of, taking it on rather than, they're my blood. That lessens for me Moshe's act of not courage, but of conscience. So, but anyway, at the snet, at the burning bush, God says, "I am the God of your ancestors, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov." Some believe this is where Moshe is shown his original birth certificate, not the amended one. Not right. My original birth certificate says "baby girl Cashow." Seeing that piece of paper for the first time. Right? It didn't say Amy Rose Bernstein. And some people believe that's God showing Moshe the paper that says, here's who you really are. Your ancestors were Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov Cohen.
State of Hawaii.
All right. So, in either case, I want to just tell you that when we were looking at this word, chatan, yes? This word, it can mean son-in-law, which goes to my argument of Tzipporah taking the place of Yitro. She steps in, takes the authority of Yitro, making Moshe, therefore, her son-in-law. In Arabic, this word means the one who is being circumcised. As It means also in Arabic to protect. This, by the way, this meaning of to protect is also the case in Akkadian. You know, Akkadian is the parent language of Hebrew. So in Akkadian, this means to protect, as it does in a cousin language, Arabic. So if that's the case, and we read this with less focus on Hatan as some kind of kinship title, but rather she's changed the state of Moshe from one in danger to one who's protected. So it is clear that Zipporah is the one who understands what to do. It's clear that she is the one who knows the ritual, can carry out the ritual, can do it in a way that is going to complete Moshe's readiness to now go to Egypt and be protected from the blood business, from the destroyer, from whatever's going to go on, right? From whatever danger is inherent in what he's done or what's coming. Or not being fully in, what that can do, whatever danger it is, she's now changed his status to the protected one, which is fascinating to me. You should know that what does Zipporah's name mean? Bird, correct. So, and if we look at religions of that area. Carmen's going, of course. Right? ISIS. I mean, think of the powerful goddess figures in that region. Many of them have birds as their totem, as their physical representation in the world. And so I don't think we can ignore that Zipporah, bird, right, is... There's remnants here. I have to believe there's remnants here of earlier than Israelite attachment to the feminine deity, and the priestess of that deity knows exactly what to do. We have the remnants of that tradition here in the Zipporah story. We've lost a lot of it, but I would love to see somebody fill out, like Anita Diamant or somebody, fill out the Zipporah story, honoring, right, her connection to the feminine deity of her people and functioning as a priestess of her people in a way that is acknowledged and accepted by Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. I just think it's a fantastic and amazing story, particularly for our time when we are dealing with so many discussions about interfaith, right? Alliances and relationships, and does somebody have to be right and somebody else wrong, right? Is there a way to draw on some of our old stories that actually challenge that idea that there's only one way, right? And one way forward. All right. So let's just finish this out. Somebody want to read it? 27.
Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Aaron, "Go to meet Moses in the wilderness." He went and met him at the mountain of God, and he kissed him. Moses told Aaron about all the things that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had committed to him and all the signs about which he had been instructed. Then Moses and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of the Israelites. Aaron repeated all the words that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had spoken to Moses, and he performed the signs in the sight of the people, and the people were convinced. When they heard that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had taken note of the Israelites and that God had seen their plight, they bowed low in homage.
Okay. So this is the end of that story. I think we can't ignore that it's an outcome of that story, right, is that Moshe is now completely commissioned. He is now completely protected. He's now changed in status in some way that allows him to truly move forward. And so Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh speaks to Aharon, Lech likrat Moshe Hamidbara, go and meet Moshe in the desert. Vayelech vayivkeshehu, and Aaron goes out to do what? In Hebrew.
Kiss.
Pagesh. The story began with Yud-Heh Vav-Heh coming out to Pagesh Moshe in order to kill him. How does that story end? The future high priest of Israel comes out to Pagesh Moshe in order to embrace him. It's lovely. Yes? Lovely. Lovely. So Moshe's status has completely changed. We have a meeting in order, to set up the consequence. And now we have a meeting to set up the consequence of what Zipporah does, which is to make Moshe embraceable. So he goes out to Yifgeshehu, to pagash him, Behar HaElohim, at the mountain of God, Vayishaklo, and he kisses him. Yes? Vayigad Moshe le'Aharon et kol divrei Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. And Moshe tells Aharon everything that God has said, including possibly, I'm your brother. I didn't know that. I'm your brother. God told me everything. I know now, right, what y'all did. I know what mom did, right? And I'm in, essentially. I'm one of you. I'm in. And here's what's happened for me with your God, Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. Then Moshe and Aharon went and assembled all the elders of the Israelites. So they go to the elders. Why? Why not just go to the people?
They were respected in those days.
In those days, they were respected. You can't just go to the people and just start talking about Yud-Heh Vav-Heh appeared to be. You got to go to the Senate. You got to go to Congress, right? You have to. Yes, that is scary. Well, okay, yeah. Let me change that. Right? You have to go. You have to go to where the authority is. You got to convince the leaders first that you're for real. You're gonna go now. Take on the position of prophet for these people, leader of these people. You better go to the standing leadership. So Moshe and Aaron go to the elders of Israel in order to presumably convince them. Right? And so Aaron repeats all the words that Yud-Heh Vav-Heh had spoken to Moses. Moshe, still passive, still not speaking, right? And then, only after that, Moshe performs signs in front of the people, and this is what convinces the people.
So this is not just the elders at this point. This
Correct.
is everybody.
Presumably. That this is now... that they're convinced that Moshe has some relationship to Yud-Heh Vav-Heh because of what they see. When they,
What do they see?
We don't know. When they heard that Yud-Heh Vav-Heh had taken note of the Israelites and that God had seen their plight, they bowed low in homage. Right? They have been acknowledged. They've been heard.